The autumn sun cast long shadows across the dusty streets of Whispering Creek as Katherine Fleming clutched her worn copy of Pride and Prejudice to her chest, ignoring the whispers that followed her like persistent flies. It was 1878, and while other young women in town were practicing their dance steps for the upcoming harvest social, Katherine found solace in the weathered pages of her beloved books, unaware that her peculiar habit would soon catch the attention of the most unlikely admirer. "There she goes again with her nose stuck in them fancy books," Mabel Wilson snickered behind her fan, loud enough for Katherine to hear as she passed the general store. "No wonder she ain't got a husband yet. What man wants a wife who'd rather read than look after a home?" Katherine quickened her pace, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. At 23, she was already considered dangerously close to spinsterhood by the town's standards. It wasn't that she didn't want to marry someday. She simply hadn't met a man who valued her mind as much as her cooking skills or her appearance. The Fleming family had moved to Whispering Creek 3 years ago after Katherine's father, a respected doctor, decided that the growing town needed medical care. While her parents had integrated well into the community, Katherine remained an outsider, her education and love of literature setting her apart from the other young women. She made her way to her favorite reading, spot a large oak tree overlooking the creek that gave the town its name. The gentle babbling of water over stones provided the perfect backdrop for her literary adventures. She settled against the rough bark and opened her book, eager to escape into the world of Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy. She was so engrossed in her reading that she didn't notice the approaching rider until his horse snorted nearby, startling her from her literary reverie. "Begging your pardon, miss. Didn't mean to frighten you." Katherine looked up to find herself staring into the most striking blue eyes she had ever seen. They belonged to a man seated atop a magnificent chestnut stallion. Dust covered his clothes, suggesting he'd been riding for some time. His wide-brimmed hat cast a shadow across his sun-bronzed face, but she could still make out a strong jaw covered with several days' worth of stubble. "You didn't frighten me," she lied, closing her book and placing it on her lap. "I was just absorbed in my reading." The stranger dismounted with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent most of his life on horseback. He removed his hat, revealing thick, sandy brown hair that curled slightly at the ends. "Lucas Jameson," he introduced himself with a slight bow. "Just rode into town looking for work." "I don't suppose you know if anyone's hiring." Katherine found herself studying his face more carefully than was proper. There was something gentle in his expression despite his rugged appearance. "My father might," she offered. "He's the town doctor, Dr. Fleming. He's been talking about needing someone to help around the clinic and with house calls to the outlying ranches." Lucas's face brightened with a smile that transformed his travel-worn features. "That sounds promising. And you are?" "Katherine Fleming," she replied, extending her hand as her father had taught her to do when introducing herself, a habit that scandalized the more traditional ladies in town. Lucas took her hand gently, giving it a brief, respectful shake rather than the customary kiss other men might have attempted. "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Fleming. I hope you don't mind me asking, but what are you reading that's got you so captivated?" Katherine blinked in surprise. Most men in Whispering Creek scoffed at her reading habit or ignored it entirely. None had ever expressed interest in the actual content of her books. "Pride and Prejudice" by Jane Austen, she answered cautiously, waiting for the inevitable dismissal or mockery. Instead, Lucas's eyes lit up with recognition. "Ah, the tale of Elizabeth Bennet and the proud Mr. Darcy. My mother was fond of that one." Katherine couldn't hide her astonishment. "You've read it." "My mother was a schoolteacher before she married my father," he explained. "She made sure all her children were well read, even us boys. Said a man with books in his saddlebag travels with the wisdom of the ages." For the first time in years, Katherine felt a flicker of connection with someone in Whispering Creek. Before she could respond, the church bell rang in the distance, signaling that it was 4 o'clock. "I should be getting home," she said, rising to her feet and brushing off her skirt. "My mother will be expecting help with dinner." "If you're looking for my father, his clinic is on Main Street, next to the apothecary." Lucas nodded, replacing his hat. "Thank you kindly, Miss Fleming. I'll pay him a visit first thing tomorrow." He hesitated, then added, "Perhaps we might continue our literary discussion another time." Katherine felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. "I'd like that, Mr. Jameson." As she walked back toward town, she couldn't help glancing over her shoulder. Lucas Jameson was still standing by the oak tree, watching her go with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. For the first time since moving to Whispering Creek, Katherine felt a strange anticipation for what tomorrow might bring. Dr. James Fleming was in need of assistance, and Lucas proved to be exactly what he was looking for. The doctor hired him on the spot the next morning, impressed by the young man's knowledge of horses and his calm demeanor. Lucas had worked as a ranch hand and sometimes medic on cattle drives, setting broken bones and stitching wounds when no doctor was available. Over the following weeks, Lucas became a fixture in the Fleming household. He lived in the small room above the clinic, took his meals with the family, and quickly earned Dr. Fleming's trust. Katherine observed him carefully during these interactions, noting his intelligent questions about her father's medical practice and his respectful manner with her mother. What impressed her most, however, was his genuine interest in her books. Each evening after dinner, while her mother and father retired to the parlor, Katherine and Lucas would sit on the back porch discussing literature, philosophy, and occasionally their dreams. "I never planned to be a cowboy," he confessed one evening as they watched fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. "I wanted to study law, but my father died when I was 16, and someone needed to help support the family." Katherine nodded sympathetically. "Life has a way of altering our carefully laid plans." "What about you?" Lucas asked. "If you could do anything, what would it be?" Katherine hesitated, unaccustomed to anyone asking about her aspirations. "I'd like to teach," she admitted finally. "Not just reading and arithmetic, but literature, history, sciences. Children in these frontier towns deserve more than the basics." Lucas studied her face in the fading light. "You'd make a fine teacher, Miss Fleming." "Most people in town think I read too much as it is," she said with a sad smile. "They consider it unnatural in a woman." Lucas's expression darkened. "Small minds fear what they don't understand." As autumn progressed, Katherine found herself looking forward to these evening conversations more than anything else in her day. But their growing closeness didn't go unnoticed in the small town. The Harvest Social was the biggest event of the season in Whispering Creek. The town hall was decorated with autumn leaves and harvest bounty, and nearly everyone attended. Katherine had never particularly enjoyed these gatherings. They usually involved awkward attempts at conversation with people who found her odd, but this year, she dressed with unusual care, selecting her best blue dress that her mother said matched her eyes. "You look lovely, dear," Mrs. Fleming said, adjusting the lace collar. "Perhaps you'll dance tonight." Katherine nodded absently, her thoughts on whether Lucas would attend. Her father had mentioned that he'd given Lucas the evening off, but she wasn't certain he'd choose to spend it at a town social. The hall was already crowded when the Fleming family arrived. Lanterns cast a warm glow over the decorated space, and a small band played lively tunes in the corner. Katherine's eyes scanned the room, but there was no sign of Lucas, Katherine Fleming, actually attending a social. Martha Peterson approached with her usual superior smile. "I was beginning to think you preferred the company of fictional characters to real people." "Good evening, Martha," Katherine replied politely, refusing to rise to the bait. "Several eligible men are here tonight," Martha continued, nodding toward a group of ranchers' sons clustered near the punch bowl. "Though I suppose you're not interested in such matters." Before Katherine could respond, a familiar voice spoke from behind her. "Evening, ladies." Lucas stood there in clean clothes, his hair still damp from washing and combed neatly. He looked so different from the dusty cowboy who assisted her father that Katherine momentarily lost her words. Martha, however, had no such problem. Her eyes widened appreciatively as she took in Lucas's tall form and handsome features. "You must be Dr. Fleming's new assistant. I'm Martha Peterson," she said, extending her hand with a flirtatious smile. "Lucas Jameson," he replied with a polite nod, then turned his attention to Katherine. Miss Fleming, you look beautiful tonight. Katherine felt her cheeks warm at the sincerity in his voice. Thank you, Mr. Jameson. The band struck up a lively reel and couples began forming lines for the dance. Would you care to dance, Miss Fleming? Lucas asked, extending his hand. Martha looked between them with poorly concealed surprise. Oh, Katherine doesn't dance, she said quickly. She's always refused at these gatherings, says she prefers to observe. Lucas kept his eyes on Katherine, his hand still extended. Is that true? Katherine hesitated. I've never been very good at it. Neither am I, Lucas admitted with a disarming smile. We can be terrible together. Something about his easy manner and the warmth in his eyes gave Katherine courage. She placed her hand in his. I'd like that. As Lucas led her to the dance floor, she heard Martha's whispered comment to another girl. Imagine that the bookworm actually dancing. Though I suppose beggars can't be choosers. Lucas must have heard it too, for his hand tightened slightly around hers. Pay them no mind, he murmured. Small town, small minds. They joined the line of dancers, and Katherine quickly discovered that Lucas had understated his dancing abilities. He moved with the same natural grace he showed on horseback, guiding her through the steps with gentle pressure on her waist and hand. You dance very well for someone who claimed not to be good at it, she accused lightly as they circled each other. Lucas laughed, the sound warming her more than the exertion of the dance. I may have stretched the truth a bit to make you feel more comfortable. When the music ended, several young men who had never shown interest in Katherine before suddenly appeared, asking for the next dance. She politely declined, preferring to return to Lucas's company, but he was quickly claimed by Martha Peterson for the following set. Katherine retreated to the refreshment table, where she found herself surrounded by several of the town's young women. He's certainly handsome, said Eliza Thompson, watching Lucas dance with Martha. Where did your father find him? He came to town looking for work, Katherine replied, uncomfortably aware of the curious stares. Well, you'd better stake your claim quickly, advised Susan Baker with a knowing look. Half the unmarried women in town have their eye on him already. We're just friends, Katherine protested, though the words felt hollow even to her own ears. Friends? Mabel Wilson scoffed. What would a man like that have in common with you? He's clearly just being polite because you're his employer's daughter. The words stung more than Katherine wanted to admit. She had wondered the same thing herself. Why would someone like Lucas, who could have his pick of company, choose to spend his evenings discussing books with her? I heard he was asking Martha about the school, Eliza added. They're looking for a teacher since Miss Winters is marrying and moving to Denver next month. Martha's father is on the school board, you know. Katherine's heart sank. Lucas had never mentioned interest in teaching, but it would make sense he was educated and good with people. And if he was discussing it with Martha rather than her, perhaps their friendship wasn't as special as she'd thought. Excuse me, she murmured, suddenly needing fresh air. She slipped outside onto the small porch that wrapped around the town hall. The night air was cool, and Katherine drew her shawl tighter around her shoulders as she gazed up at the star-filled sky. She had allowed herself to dream, to imagine that Lucas saw something in her that others missed. How foolish. The door opened behind her, spilling light and music onto the porch. There you are, Lucas said, joining her at the railing. I was looking for you. I needed some air, she explained, not meeting his eyes. You should go back inside. I believe Martha was hoping for another dance. Lucas was silent for a moment. Is that what you want me to do? Katherine finally looked at him, trying to keep her expression neutral. It doesn't matter what I want. Martha is the daughter of the town's most prosperous merchant. She's pretty, sociable, and her father is on the school board. The school board? Lucas looked genuinely confused. I heard you were asking about the teaching position, Katherine said, hating the note of accusation that crept into her voice. Understanding dawned on Lucas's face, followed by a smile that took Katherine by surprise. I was asking about the position, but not for myself. He took a step closer. For you, Katherine stared at him. For me, you told me you wanted to teach, he reminded her gently. When Miss Winters's engagement was announced yesterday, I thought of you immediately. I was trying to find out if they'd consider you for the position. Emotion welled in Catherine's throat. You did that for me. I would do a great deal more for you, Katherine, Lucas said softly, using her given name for the first time. His eyes, illuminated by the moonlight, held an intensity that made her breath catch. The door opened again, and Martha Peterson stepped onto the porch. Oh, there you are, Mr. Jameson. They're about to start the Virginia reel, and you promised me a dance. Lucas didn't take his eyes off Katherine. I'm afraid I'll have to break that promise, Miss Peterson. Miss Fleming and I are in the middle of an important conversation. Martha's expression soured. Honestly, Katherine, I don't know what spell you've cast on the poor man. Everyone knows you'd rather have your head in a book than learn to be a proper wife. Lucas turned to face Martha, his expression hardening. Miss Peterson, I don't believe anyone asked for your opinion on what makes a proper wife. Now, if you'll excuse us. Martha's mouth fell open in shock, but she recovered quickly. Well, I never, she spun on her heel and marched back inside, letting the door slam behind her. Katherine stared at Lucas, torn between mortification and amazement at his defense of her. You shouldn't have done that. She'll tell everyone, let her, Lucas interrupted, taking Katherine's hands in his. I don't care what anyone in this town thinks except you, but your reputation, my reputation, is my own concern. His thumbs traced gentle circles on her palms. Katherine, do you know what first drew me to you? It wasn't your beauty, though you are beautiful. It was seeing you under that oak tree, so lost in your book that the world around you disappeared. I knew then that your mind was something special. Katherine felt tears prickling behind her eyes. No one had ever spoken to her this way. The women in there, Lucas continued, nodding toward the hall, they dance and smile and say all the right things, but their conversation is as shallow as a dried-up creek bed. When I talk with you, it's like diving into an endless ocean of ideas. He lifted one hand to gently brush a strand of hair from her face. I don't want a wife who can dance perfectly or charm dinner guests with empty chatter. I want a partner whose mind challenges me, whose thoughts surprise me, whose intelligence makes me better than I am. Katherine could scarcely breathe. Lucas, I know it's too soon, he said quickly. We've only known each other a short while, but I want you to know that I see you, Katherine Fleming. I see your brilliant mind, your kind heart, your quiet strength. And I admire every part of you, especially your love of books. Before Katherine could respond, they heard voices approaching the porch. Lucas reluctantly released her hands and stepped back to a respectable distance. We should return inside, he said softly, but I meant every word. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur for Katherine. She danced twice more with Lucas, ignoring the whispers and stares their partnership provoked. For the first time in her life, she didn't care what the townspeople thought of her. The only opinion that mattered was that of the man whose eyes followed her with undisguised admiration. As autumn gave way to winter, Katherine and Lucas grew closer. Their evening conversations on the porch moved to the Fleming family parlor as the weather turned cold, but the topics remained as varied and stimulating as ever. They discussed Darwin's theories, debated the merits of Dickens versus Twain, and shared their favorite poems by candlelight. Dr. Fleming observed their growing attachment with quiet approval. That young man has a good head on his shoulders, he commented to his wife one evening after Lucas had bid the family good night. And he seems to genuinely appreciate our Katherine's intellect. Mrs. Fleming nodded thoughtfully. It's about time someone did. I've worried for years that she'd never find a suitable match in this town. What neither of them knew was that Lucas had been saving nearly every penny of his wages, adding to the modest sum he'd brought with him to Whispering Creek. He had plans that involved Katherine, but he needed to establish himself properly before he could speak of them. His opportunity came in December when old Doc Wilson, who owned the livery stable, announced his intention to sell the business and move to California to live with his daughter. The livery was profitable, strategically located on the main road into town, and included a small but comfortable house behind the stables. Lucas approached Dr. Fleming about borrowing the remaining funds he needed to purchase the business. I know it's a substantial amount, he said, showing the doctor his carefully kept accounts, but the livery brings in steady income, and I can continue to assist you with house calls and emergencies." Dr. Fleming studied the figures, impressed by Lucas's financial prudence. "This is a sound investment, Lucas. I'd be happy to help you secure it." He gave the younger man a knowing look. "I presume this sudden interest in putting down roots has something to do with my daughter." Lucas met his gaze steadily. "Yes, sir. I love Katherine, and I hope to ask for her hand with your blessing, of course once I've established myself as a business owner." Dr. Fleming nodded approvingly. "You have my blessing, son. Katherine deserves a man who values her for who she is. I've seen how you look at her when she's discussing her books or expressing her opinions like she's revealing hidden treasures with every word." "That's exactly how it feels, sir," Lucas admitted with a smile. "Her mind is extraordinary." 2 days before Christmas, Lucas became the official owner of Whispering Creek Livery. He asked Katherine to walk with him after Sunday services to see the property, though she was unaware of the change in ownership. Snow blanketed the town in pristine white, and their breath formed clouds in the crisp air as they walked arm in arm down the main street. Several townspeople nodded greetings, having grown accustomed to seeing them together, though some of the older matrons still exchanged disapproving glances. "I have something to show you," Lucas said as they approached the livery. "The stables?" Katherine asked, puzzled. Lucas smiled mysteriously and led her around to the small house behind the main building. He withdrew a key from his pocket and unlocked the front door. "Lucas, what are you doing?" "We can't just enter Doc Wilson's house. We're not trespassing," he assured her, guiding her inside. "As of yesterday, this is my property." Katherine stared at him in astonishment. "Your property? You bought the livery?" Lucas nodded, watching her face carefully. "With your father's help." "What do you think?" Katherine looked around the modest but well-built home. It had a cozy front room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen, and she could see doors leading to what she presumed were bedrooms. "It's lovely," she said sincerely. "But why didn't you tell me you were planning this?" Lucas took both her hands in his. "Because it's part of a larger plan." He took a deep breath. "Katherine, these past months with you have been the happiest of my life. When I rode into Whispering Creek, I was just passing through, looking for temporary work before moving on. Then I met you under that oak tree with your book, and suddenly I wanted to put down roots." Katherine's heart began to race as Lucas continued. "I love you, Katherine Fleming. I love your brilliant mind, your gentle heart, your quiet courage in being yourself despite what others think. I want to build a life with you, a life filled with books and ideas and conversation that never grows dull." He gestured around the room. "I wanted to have something to offer you, a home of our own." Tears welled in Katherine's eyes as Lucas knelt before her and pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. "Katherine, will you marry me? Will you be my partner in every sense, in business, in family, in intellect and heart?" Katherine could scarcely believe that this was happening to her, the girl whom everyone in town had written off as an odd, bookish spinster to be. Yet here was this remarkable man, looking at her with love and admiration, offering her everything she'd secretly dreamed of, but never dared hope for. "Yes," she whispered, then more firmly, "Yes, Lucas, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, a modest gold band with a small pearl, and rose to embrace her. Their kiss was tender, full of promise and shared dreams. When they announced their engagement at the Fleming family Christmas dinner the next day, Katherine's parents were delighted but unsurprised. They had watched the courtship unfold and had no doubts about the couple's devotion to each other. Word spread quickly through the small town. Many offered sincere congratulations, particularly those who had gotten to know Lucas through his work with Dr. Fleming. Others were more skeptical, particularly the mothers of eligible daughters who had set their sights on the handsome newcomer. "It won't last," predicted Mabel Wilson to anyone who would listen. "What man wants a wife who cares more about books than keeping a proper home? He'll tire of her intellectual notions soon enough." Martha Peterson was particularly bitter. "She trapped him somehow," she insisted to her friends. "Probably used her father's influence. What else could explain it?" These unkind whispers reached Katherine's ears. Of course, in a town the size of Whispering Creek, little remained private for long. Though she tried not to let them affect her, there were moments of doubt. Are you certain you won't regret choosing me? She asked Lucas one evening as they sat by the fire in her parents' parlor, making plans for their February wedding. Someone like Martha would make a more traditional wife. Lucas's expression grew serious. Katherine, do you know what my mother told me before she died? She said, Lucas, marry a woman whose mind you admire, for beauty fades but intelligence endures. She and my father were married for 30 years, and he said their best times were the evenings they spent reading to each other by lamplight. He took her hand, rubbing his thumb over her engagement ring. I don't want a traditional wife who thinks her opinions should mirror mine. I want you with your questions and challenges and ideas that make me see the world differently. Katherine's doubts melted under the warmth of his conviction. I love you, she said simply. And I love you, he replied. Every bookish, beautiful part of you. They were married on a bright February morning in 1879 in the small white church of Whispering Creek. Katherine wore her mother's wedding gown, altered to fit her more slender frame, with a crown of winter holly in her dark hair. Lucas cut a handsome figure in a new suit, his face alight with joy as he watched his bride walk down the aisle on her father's arm. The church was full, some attendees genuinely happy for the couple, others simply curious to witness the union of the town's unusual bookworm and the enterprising newcomer. Katherine noticed Martha Peterson and her friends whispering behind their prayer books, but found she didn't care. The only person whose opinion mattered was waiting for her at the altar, his blue eyes shining with love. Their vows were traditional, but spoken with such evident sincerity that even the most cynical observers were moved. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Lucas's kiss was both tender and possessive, a promise of the life they would build together. The reception was held in the town hall, decorated with evergreen boughs and white ribbons. As the newly married couple circled the dance floor for their first dance, Lucas pulled Katherine close and whispered, "Happy, Mrs. Jameson." "Extraordinarily so, Mr. Jameson," she replied, savoring the new name that symbolized their union. Later, as they greeted their guests, Katherine was surprised when Eliza Thompson approached with congratulations that seemed genuinely warm. "I never understood you before," Eliza admitted. "But seeing you with Lucas, how he listens to you and values your thoughts, it's made me reconsider some things." She glanced across the room to where her beau stood talking with other young men. "Perhaps there's more to marriage than I was taught." As the celebration continued, Dr. Fleming raised his glass for a toast. "To my daughter and new son-in-law," he began, his voice carrying across the hall. "May your partnership be as enriching to your minds as it is to your hearts." Lucas responded with his own toast. "To my beautiful bride," he said, looking directly at Katherine with such devotion that she blushed, "whose mind is my forever partner, whose heart is my greatest treasure, and whose love is the best story I'll ever know." The sincerity in his voice silenced even the most persistent critics. For that moment, at least, the entire town glimpsed what Katherine and Lucas had discovered. That true partnership transcends conventional expectations, that love at its best celebrates all aspects of the beloved, including, perhaps especially, the mind. That evening, Lucas carried his bride across the threshold of their new home behind the livery. Katherine gasped in surprise when she saw the interior. During the weeks of their engagement, Lucas had been secretly preparing a wedding gift. The small second bedroom had been transformed into a library, with bookshelves lining the walls and a comfortable reading chair placed near the window to catch the morning light. "Lucas, it's perfect," Katherine breathed, running her fingers along the spines of the books her own collection moved from her parents' home, supplemented by several new volumes Lucas had ordered from Denver. "Every home needs a library," he said, watching her delight with satisfaction. "Especially ours." Later that night, as they lay together in the intimate darkness of their marriage bed, Katherine marveled at how thoroughly Lucas had shattered her expectations. Society had taught her that men wanted docile, domestic wives, not intellectual equals. Yet here was this remarkable man who cherished her mind as much as her body, who saw her love of books not as an oddity to be tolerated, but as a quality to be celebrated. "What are you thinking?" Lucas murmured, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "That I'm the luckiest woman in the world," she answered truthfully. "I never thought I'd find someone who understood me as you do." He pulled her closer. "We understand each other. That's the beauty of it." As winter gave way to spring, the newlyweds settled into a rhythm of shared work and domestic harmony. The livery business thrived under Lucas's management, and Katherine found unexpected satisfaction in keeping the books and correspondence. In the evenings, they took turns reading aloud to each other by the fire, discussing ideas from philosophy to politics to literature with equal enthusiasm. Word of Katherine's intellect and education spread beyond Whispering Creek, and in March, she received a surprising visit from Mr. Peterson, head of the school board. "Mrs. Jameson," he began formally, seated in her parlor with a cup of tea, "as you may know, we've been unable to find a suitable replacement for Miss Winters at the school. The candidate from Denver declined our offer, and we're facing the prospect of closing until autumn." Katherine nodded, wondering why he was telling her this. "Several parents have suggested that you might be willing to take the position," he continued. "Dr. Winters speaks highly of your education, and we've observed your scholarly inclinations over the years." Katherine nearly spilled her tea in surprise. "You want me to teach at the school? Temporarily, of course," Mr. Peterson added hastily. "Until we can secure a permanent teacher. The term runs only until May." Katherine glanced at Lucas, who was trying unsuccessfully to hide his smile. "I would be honored," she said, turning back to Mr. Peterson. "When would you like me to start?" "Monday next, if possible. The children have already missed 3 weeks of instruction." After Mr. Peterson left, Katherine turned to Lucas with wide eyes. "Did you know about this?" "I may have mentioned to Dr. Winters that you'd be perfect for the position," he admitted. "But the parents' request was genuine. Word has gotten around about how you've been helping some of the children with their studies when they come to the livery with their parents." Katherine threw her arms around him. "Thank you for believing in me." "Always," he promised. Katherine's temporary position at the school proved to be a revelation both for her and for the community. Her innovative teaching methods and genuine enthusiasm for learning transformed the small schoolhouse. Children who had previously dreaded lessons now arrived early, eager to hear what Mrs. Jameson would share that day. She introduced her students to Shakespeare through dramatic readings, taught mathematics through practical applications like measuring and building, and brought history alive through vivid storytelling. Parents noted the change in their children, who suddenly discussed Roman emperors at the dinner table and asked for books as presents. By the time May arrived, the school board faced a petition signed by nearly every parent in Whispering Creek, requesting that Katherine be offered the permanent teaching position. Even Mr. Peterson, who had initially been skeptical of her suitability, became her advocate after his own daughter's dramatic improvement in reading. "It seems the town has finally recognized what I've always known," Lucas said proudly when Katherine showed him the official offer letter. "Your mind is extraordinary, and now others see it too." Katherine's eyes filled with happy tears. "I never imagined they would accept me like this, all those years of feeling like an outsider because I loved books." "You've shown them that a woman can be both intellectual and feminine, both a wife and a teacher," Lucas said, embracing her. "You're changing minds, my love." As spring bloomed into summer, Katherine divided her time between teaching and helping Lucas with the livery. They worked side by side, read side by side, dreamed side by side. Their partnership became the talk of the town not as an oddity, but increasingly as a model of what marriage could be. Even Martha Peterson, who had been Katherine's most vocal critic, grudgingly admitted the success of their union. "They do seem well-suited," she conceded to her friends after observing Lucas and Katherine deep in animated conversation at a town gathering. "Though I still don't understand what they find to talk about so endlessly." In July, Katherine made a discovery that added new dimension to their happiness. After several mornings of feeling unwell, a visit to her father confirmed what she had begun to suspect. She was expecting their first child. Lucas's response to the news was everything Katherine could have hoped for. His joy was immediate and unrestrained, but so was his concern for her well-being. "Will you want to continue teaching?" he asked as they sat on their porch that evening, watching fireflies illuminate the summer darkness. No one would blame you if you wished to focus on the baby. Katherine appreciated that he posed it as a question rather than an assumption. "I'd like to continue through the fall term if my health permits," she said thoughtfully. "After that, perhaps I could take a break until the baby is a bit older." Lucas nodded, his hand resting protectively over hers. "Whatever you decide, I'll support you. Our child will have the great fortune of a mother who can teach them about the world's wonders from the cradle. And a father who values knowledge as much as strength," Katherine added, leaning against his shoulder. "We'll raise them to love books and ideas, to question and explore." "Just like their mother," Lucas said, kissing the top of her head. "And their father," Katherine reminded him. "Don't forget, you're the one who first recognized Jane Austen under that oak tree." As summer faded into autumn, Katherine's condition became visible, eliciting mixed reactions from the townspeople. Most offered sincere congratulations, but a few older women couldn't resist delivering unsolicited advice. "You'll need to give up that teaching nonsense once the baby comes," Mrs. Wilson informed her after church one Sunday. "A child needs its mother's full attention." Before Katherine could respond, Lucas stepped to her side. "Mrs. Wilson, did you know that Katherine is developing a new reading program for the younger children? The school board believes it could be adopted by other schools in the territory." His strategy was effective, redirecting the conversation to Katherine's professional accomplishments rather than engaging with the criticism. It was one of the many ways he protected her without diminishing her independence. In October, the harvest social that had marked the beginning of their courtship the previous year became the setting for another milestone. The town council, impressed by the improvements in the school under Katherine's guidance, presented her with a special commendation. "Mrs. Jameson has demonstrated that intelligence and dedication know no gender," announced Mayor Thompson, presenting her with a framed certificate. "Our children are fortunate to have such a teacher, and Whispering Creek is fortunate to have such a citizen." Katherine accepted the honor with grace, but her greatest satisfaction came from the expression of pride on Lucas's face as he watched from the crowd. Later, as they danced together under the harvest decorations, he whispered, "Do you remember last year, when Martha said you'd rather have your head in a book than learn to be a proper wife?" Katherine smiled at the memory. "I remember your defense of me. And now look at you honored by the same people who once whispered behind your back, respected for the very qualities they criticized." His hand tightened around hers. "You've changed this town, Katherine. We've changed it together," she corrected him. "Your belief in me made it possible." As they circled the dance floor, Katherine caught sight of several young girls watching them with undisguised admiration. Among them was Martha Peterson's younger sister, Emma, clutching a book to her chest in a manner reminiscent of Katherine's own habit. The sight filled Katherine with quiet hope. Perhaps the next generation of Whispering Creek's young women would find it easier to pursue their intellectual interests, to be valued for their minds as well as their domestic abilities. Their child, a daughter they named Elizabeth Jane Jameson, after the heroines of Katherine's favorite novel, was born on a snowy January morning in 1880. Lucas paced anxiously outside the bedroom while Dr. Fleming attended Katherine, his worry giving way to overwhelming joy when he finally held his daughter in his arms. "She has your eyes," Katherine said tiredly but happily from the bed, "and hopefully your patience." "And your intelligence," Lucas added, carefully placing the infant in Katherine's arms. "Look at how alert she is already." In the weeks that followed, they established new routines around their daughter's needs. Lucas took on more of the livery's day-to-day operations, allowing Katherine to focus on recovery and caring for Elizabeth. But even in those early days, their evening reading tradition continued, now with Elizabeth nestled between them, absorbing the cadence of their voices as they took turns reading aloud. "It's never too early to introduce her to good literature," Katherine maintained when her mother suggested the baby was too young to benefit from such exposure. "Besides," Lucas added with a wink, "we're establishing important family traditions." By spring, Katherine had recovered her strength and developed a comfortable rhythm with Elizabeth's care. She resumed teaching part-time, bringing the baby with her to the schoolhouse 3 mornings a week. The arrangement raised eyebrows initially, but the children were delighted by their teacher's infant, and the older girls eagerly helped mind Elizabeth during lessons. As Elizabeth grew from infant to toddler to little girl, she embodied the best of both her parents, Lucas's steady temperament and Katherine's curious mind. By age 3, she was already attempting to read simple words, sitting on her father's lap in the evenings while he pointed out letters in the newspaper. "She's going to be just like you," Lucas said to Katherine one evening as they watched Elizabeth reading to her dolls, reciting from memory a story Katherine had read to her countless times. "God help her," Katherine laughed. "God blessed her," Lucas corrected, taking his wife's hand. "Just as he blessed me when he led me to that oak tree and the beautiful bookworm beneath it." In the spring of 1883, as Elizabeth approached her 3rd birthday, Katherine made another discovery that would further expand their family. Their second child, a son they would name James Lucas, was on the way. The news coincided with another development. Lucas had been offered the opportunity to purchase the adjacent property to expand the livery business. The investment would strain their resources, but promised significant returns as Whispering Creek continued to grow with the railroad's approach. "What do you think?" Lucas asked Katherine as they reviewed the figures together at their kitchen table after Elizabeth was asleep. "It's a substantial risk." Katherine studied the numbers, considering all angles of the proposition. Lucas waited patiently, valuing her financial acumen as much as her other qualities. "I think we should do it," she said finally. "The railroad will change everything for this town. We should be positioned to benefit from that change." Lucas nodded, satisfied with her assessment. "My thoughts exactly. We'll need to be careful with expenses for a while, but with your teaching income and the current livery profits, we can manage the payments." "We've faced bigger challenges," Katherine reminded him, resting a hand on her still flat stomach. "Like raising 2 children while running a business and teaching school." Lucas laughed and pulled her onto his lap, a gesture that still made her heart race after 4 years of marriage. "Nothing daunts you, does it? Not small-minded gossips, not childbirth, not business expansion." "Not with you beside me," she said, kissing him softly. Their second child, James, was born in November 1883, a sturdy boy with Lucas's features, and, as became apparent in his early months, Katherine's intensity. Where Elizabeth was thoughtful and deliberate, James was curious and energetic, exploring his world with fearless determination as soon as he could crawl. "He's going to keep us on our toes," Lucas predicted as they chased their son across the parlor floor one evening. "At least we'll never be bored," Katherine laughed, scooping up the crawling baby before he could reach the fireplace. The expanded livery business proved to be as successful as they had anticipated. When the railroad finally reached Whispering Creek in 1884, the town's population swelled, and the demand for horses, repairs, and transportation increased accordingly. Lucas hired 2 assistants to help with the workload, while Katherine continued teaching and managing the business accounts. Their partnership, unusual as it had once seemed to the townspeople, was now recognized as a key factor in their success. Men who had once scoffed at the idea of consulting their wives on business matters began to reconsider, observing how the Jamesons' shared decision-making contributed to their prosperity. In the summer of 1885, as they celebrated their 6th wedding anniversary, Lucas surprised Katherine with a gift that brought her to tears: a first edition of Pride and Prejudice that he had secretly commissioned a book dealer in Denver to find. "How did you manage this?" She gasped, carefully opening the precious volume. "I have my ways," he said mysteriously. It seemed fitting to commemorate the book that first connected us. Katherine traced the title page with reverent fingers. "It's perfect, but I'm afraid my gift for you pales in comparison." She handed him a small package containing a new pocket watch to replace the one that had been damaged in a stable accident. "It's exactly what I needed," he assured her, admiring the silver timepiece. "Practical and handsome, just like its owner," he added with a wink. And modest too, Katherine laughed. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, they sat on their porch swing watching the summer stars emerge. Katherine rested her head on Lucas's shoulder, reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment. "Did you ever imagine this would be your life?" she asked. When you rode into Whispering Creek that day, Lucas considered the question. "No," he admitted. "I expected to stay a few months at most, earn some money, and move on. I certainly never expected to find a brilliant, beautiful woman reading Jane Austen under an oak tree. And I never expected a dusty cowboy to recognize the book and quote from it," Katherine countered with a smile. "We defied expectations," Lucas said, pulling her closer. "Both the town's and our own." "We still do," Katherine pointed out. "A lady teacher with 2 children, a husband who encourages her career rather than merely tolerating it. We're hardly conventional." "Convention is overrated," Lucas declared. "I'll take our unconventional happiness over conventional misery any day." As they sat in comfortable silence, Katherine thought about the young woman she had been insecure about her love of books, doubtful that she would ever find someone who valued her mind. How far she had come from those days, largely because one man had seen beyond social expectations to recognize her true worth. "Your mind is my forever partner," Lucas had said at their wedding, and he had proven those words true every day since. Their intellectual connection remained as vibrant as their physical one, their conversations as stimulating as their embraces. In the years that followed, the Jameson family continued to thrive. Elizabeth followed in her mother's footsteps, developing a passion for literature and eventually studying at a women's college in the East, an opportunity Katherine had never had but ensured for her daughter. James inherited his father's business acumen, along with his mother's intellectual curiosity, eventually expanding the family enterprise to include a freight company serving the entire region. Katherine's teaching career spanned over 3 decades, during which she educated several generations of Whispering Creek's children. The innovative reading program she developed was indeed adopted by schools throughout the territory, earning her recognition far beyond the small town's borders. Lucas's livery evolved with the changing times, incorporating new technologies while maintaining the personal service that had been his hallmark from the beginning. Throughout it all, he remained Katherine's steadfast champion, as proud of her accomplishments as his own. On warm summer evenings, long after their children were grown with families of their own, Lucas and Katherine could still be found on their porch swing, books in hand, reading and discussing ideas just as they had in the early days of their marriage. And sometimes, when the mood struck them, they would walk to the old oak tree by the creek where they had first met. There, with the water babbling over stones and the leaves rustling overhead, they would remind each other of the unlikely beginning of their enduring love story, how a bookish bride and a literature-loving cowboy had defied convention to build a partnership of both heart and mind. "Your mind is my forever partner," Lucas would say, echoing his wedding toast from so many years before, and Katherine, her hand still perfectly fitted to his after decades together, would reply with the truth that had shaped their lives. "And yours is mine."